Kush field trip. So since we don't have school really working on social studies next week, we're going to be thinking about those student conferences. I wanted to make sure we got this time in so that you could watch this video and you could get some more information about Kush to be thinking about, right? So here is the continent of Africa. This is where we've been for the past couple of chapters, right? We know that this is where ancient Kush is. We know that this is where ancient Egypt is. So I'm going to zoom us in so we can kind of get a better view here. Let's zoom in. There's Egypt in the north. Here we are in the south in Sudan. And we are along that fabulous Nile River. And here we are. So this is the original capital of Kush. This is Kerma. And it's one of the largest historical sites in Sudan. So this is a huge, huge spot. And I'm just going to give you a sense of scale. If we're looking over here, there's really a 360 view. And all of these little notches in the ground, these are where buildings would have been. So it's just a huge, huge area. Here's some tourists enjoying the view. But really, it's a tremendous, tremendous spot, right? And we know now, as historians, as many as 10,000 people lived here, right? So it's pretty shocking. At its height, 10,000 people live here. That is a lot of people by the standards of the ancient times. And the way we found that out, historians kind of have pieced together little parts of what Kerma was and what it was like, based on these burial mounds called tumuli. So I'll show you what that looks like, just like this. So these kind of like holes in the ground that they found all the way around the city. And these are the ways that normal people in Kerma, this capital, would have been buried. Inside of these burial mounds, there's like hundreds of them, right? We find all these different clues about their lives. So we can see here there's some pottery in there. We found out that pottery was covered in this blue faience, right? So this is something we've talked about before. The artisans in Kush were really, really good at this technique of glazing that blue pottery. They also found things like animals that they sacrificed. We know that they really liked cows and they really liked frogs because they had all kinds of pictures of those things inside of these burials. And we found metal objects, right? So we know they were masters of metalworking, of using bronze, of making sculpture. One of those sculptural things that they found. This was just a little over 15 years ago. So this is a really exciting historical site because a lot of it just hasn't been excavated yet. One of the things they found were these masterpiece statues. So these statues here were found in just 2003, right? They're masterpieces of the ancient world, and they're of the pharaohs Taharka and Tatmadaw. So these were 25th dynasty rulers of Egypt. These guys, they were the pharaohs of Egypt when Kush took Egypt over in that 25th dynasty. And they wanted to celebrate it by having these statues made and sent back to the original capital here at Kerma, right? So we also know this spot was important because even though this wasn't the capital past a certain point in time, they kept going back. All the Kushites kept going back to show that they cared about this spot by having people buried here and by having artwork made here. Okay. And so, yeah, just like I said, the presence of these artifacts spanning over 500 years of Kush culture shows us that the city has great importance to the Kushites, and that even when the capital moved to Napata and then Meroe, these leaders kept coming back to this original capital city at Kerma to build temples and to build shrines. Pretty cool site. Okay, so what else is at Kerma? What else can we learn about this place? Let's zip through the map. Here we are. So this is one of those sites. So just now we were standing at the top here. Now we're at the bottom of this weirdly shaped object slash site called the Defufa. This one is the Western Defufa. It's a really unique religious structure. And it's found near the capital of Kerma, so you can see we're looking out. There's Kerma. Beautiful. There's the tourist looking at Kerma. Here's the Defufa, which we were just standing on top of. And there's 3 of these. So there's the western one, the eastern one, and the third one. I don't know. Historians are not good at naming things, so sometimes they just give up. They couldn't think of another direction. Okay, but these Defufa, right, they're built out of these mud bricks called adobe. Adobe is not going to break down in this very dry environment, right? So the only thing that's affected this structure has been wind and sort of like sandstorms type stuff. So it's pretty well intact, pretty amazing. And they were used for lots of different things. So in the center here, we kind of know that it was this structure. So there would have been a passageway. It probably would have had pictures of animals in it and maybe some animal sacrifices. Then you would go through that passageway and the king's mummified body is going to be in here. And he would be laying on a bed. So that's something that made ancient Kush kind of unique from ancient Egypt, is that they put their mummified kings on beds in their tombs. Then on the top, so let's look up here. On the top, we know that's probably where they had religious ceremonies. So they found evidence of different things to figure that out, like sacrifices, like leftover stuff, leftover artifacts. And one important god to them that they may have been worshiping up there was this guy. So let me show you. Epidemic, right? I also have a little figurine of him. So he's got a head that looks like a lion. He's got an amazing Kushite bow. We know they were super strong archers in the military. And he's got kind of this body that's like a snake. Pretty weird. But they really liked this god. This was, once again, unique to ancient Kush. Ancient Egyptians did not worship this guy. He was the lion god. He was like their main god. And he was known as a protector and someone who was a warrior. So he was super strong in that way as well. So at the top, we're doing religious ceremonies to Epidemic. In the middle part, we've got the king buried. At the bottom, we found evidence of iron forges and metal forges. So they probably had some kind of workshop down here. And we know that because we found evidence of slag. So I talked about that last class, talking about the process of metalworking, how we start with crushing those pieces into smaller pieces. Then we melt out all that metal through oxidation. Then we hammer it out and shape it, right, to make it stronger. And then finally they would polish it up. So there's leftovers of that process down at the bottom here. So this structure, we know it was super important to them, right? They were very interested in this Defufa. They used it for lots of different things. And here is a picture of kind of what that forge looks like that I was just talking about for metal. And here's another picture of that adobe. So you can see those bricks are really still intact. All it is mud that's been dried in the sun, but it's super strong. Pretty cool. Okay, speaking of religion, let's go to our next place. So we go up, down the Nile. Oh, see this S shape here? We're going to talk about that. Okay, so now we are at this place called Jebel Barkal. Jebel Barkal is really interesting because it's a temple, and there's also some pyramids in the back there that I'm going to talk about in just a second. But this is the view that is just like this one here that an artist has reconstructed. So at some point in time, there was a giant temple here, right? There were probably some other buildings over this way that got taken down. And we know that this was a really important site to the ancient Egyptians, actually. So before that Defufa, before those statues were made of Taharka and Tatwamani, the Egyptians actually came into Kush and they took over. And what they did was they built this temple here at that spot in the Nile I was talking about that looks like an S shape. Why did they do that? They wanted to honor the god Amun. So Amun is their big god, right? Their father god, the god of the sun and air. Super important to them. They wanted to build this temple here at this site at Jebel Barkal because it was where the Nile turns south and north to form that S shape, right? For the ancient Egyptians, they think of the sunset as like the end of life, right? They associate it with death, they associate it with the afterlife and the underworld. And then sunrise is like new life, growing up, living, right? This spot was unique because if you stood at this temple, the sun wouldn't be rising in the east. It would be rising in the west. And that's normally where the sun would set, right? Because of this S shape. S shape in the Nile, it kind of like throws off your perception of where things are and where the sun is rising and where the sun is setting. They see the sun rise in the west and they go, whoa, that's normally where it's supposed to be associated with death, where we're supposed to be seeing the sun set, where we're thinking about the afterlife. That must be a special sacred spot. It's opposite of what we're used to. So maybe that's where the spot of creation of human life is, right? So they thought this was super important, this area. Nowadays, this is what it looks like. So there's not much of this left, right? But it is super important because the Kushites also thought this was an important spot, right? So when Kush takes over again back from Egypt, they still use this site. They still use this temple. And in fact, they think it's so important that they make their new capital over here at Napata. So they really, really are taking on some of those Egyptian ideas about the gods and about Egyptian religion. But a way that they make it a little different is they start keeping sacred cattle at the temple. So they think cows, are really sacred. And they also start sacrificing those cows to Epidemic, so that lion god I was talking about last time. And they sacrifice the cows to Amun. So they're kind of doing the Egyptian religion stuff, but they're also adding their own Kush religion stuff. It's kind of blending it together, right? Historians call that syncretism, but that's a really complicated word. Okay, so this is a closer view. So this is really what we might have thought it looked like. It's really too bad we don't know what it looks like now. If you are doing your presentation and you want to make a visual of this on Tinkercad, that would be so awesome. I would really enjoy seeing that. Another way that this site is important is that the 25th dynasty, so those guys that made those huge statues that were just discovered, they also go into this temple and they start recording themselves on the walls of this Egyptian temple so that they are a part of it, right? That they're important and they're shown on that temple. And then also, when Piye defeats Egypt, he takes back the temple territory and he puts like a victory thing on the wall to say, like, this is mine. This is my achievement. So it's an interesting spot because we see part of Egypt there and part of Kush there. And definitely something you want to think about in terms of comparing and contrasting these two empires. There are those pyramids, as I promised. They are also in this spot. There's just a few of them over here. But once again, very interesting because like ancient Egypt, people are buried in these pyramids. Unlike ancient Egypt, they're not always kings, right? They could be noble people. They could just be rich merchants. We don't really know. But these temples, pyramids rather, they are steeper than the ones in Egypt. And also there's way more of them. There's like over 200 of them. All right, cool. Let's move on along. Moving on out. Now we're going to the third capital of Kush. So this is that last spot. They first start in Kerma, then they move the capital to Napata when Egypt takes over and they take back over again. And then the third spot is Meroe. So Meroe is kind of the most famous of Kush's capitals. It's when Kush really takes off as an empire and starts to be seen as this force in the whole world. And so this is the largest archaeological site in the world. Pretty amazing. It has more pyramids than any other site on Earth, over 200 in total. This is the view from the top of one of those pyramids, so it's pretty stunning. You can see our friend here hanging out, enjoying the view. And it's just the sheer amount of pyramids you can look at. As far as the eye can see, there are these pyramids. Pretty amazing. Another thing that's important about Kush is that these pyramids were constructed, so they were built for longer here in Kush or in Nubia than in Egypt. And they're a little bit different. So I talked about how they're smaller, they're steeper, they're used for nobles as well as kings and queens or kantakes. And they have a chapel that faces east. So I'll show you there. So there's that chapel part that faces east. And then they have a stairway that faces east. So that goes upwards into the pyramid. And then there's the chamber across the stairway. So inside the chamber, there's pictures of the afterlife, and there's that bed that I talked about that the mummy is going to be laid on. So here's another picture. Inside, it goes really, really deep in there. And there's pretty cool details all over the walls, too. And you go in further, and there's those pictures of the afterlife. Amazing geometry at the top here that they've done as artists. And there we are again. So that is what is inside of those pyramids at Meroe, that last capital. Let's go walk among the pyramids for a little bit, though. Now that we've done the top view, let's look inside. Oh, whoa. Okay, so inside is pretty cool too, right? We can kind of see it's still a pretty deserty, wasteland area, but it's just amazing to see how much stuff is here. It's all the way along the horizon. Almost looks like tiny little mountain ranges, right? Yeah. Over here, we can see some of the tops of these pyramids are gone, right? We know that's because Europeans came in and they stole stuff. So they took like jewels and gold and probably some iron artifacts too. Same goes for this one and this one. Probably looted, but still pretty amazing to look at, right? Pretty fantastic. All right. So I just thought it would be cool for us to see some of these sites because they're so breathtaking, to quote one of y'all in our Egypt Kush Padlet. And I think there's some great history here and some really amazing accomplishments that don't get talked about. We're talking about the largest historical site in the world, y'all. And lots of us don't even know about it. So that's why it's important that we always uplift African history. We make sure that it is valued the same, if not more, than other history that we're familiar with. I really want to come visit this at some point, and if any of you ever do, please get in touch with me, send me an email, because I would love to hear about it and to hear about your travels. All right, y'all, have a great rest of your day. Thanks for watching my video, and I will talk to you later in class.